everyone, and welcome to the Courage 365 show. I'm your host, Ashley Easter, and I am so excited to have you joining us today. We're going to have a really great show because our guest today is Tim Lennon. I'm going to introduce him to you in just a few minutes, but I just wanted to say hello to you all. Hope you are having a good week and that you are hopefully enjoying our show so far. If you are tuning in either during the live recording or even after, what I would love for you to do is comment below if you see something that you like, if you hear something that you like, and also let us know what other speakers you would be interested in hearing from, particularly if you have people of color who are advocates and survivors that you'd like to recommend come on the show, people who have different backgrounds and thoughts around the survivor movement. We would love to hear some of your suggestions in the comment section. Anyway, we are going to begin our show straight away, and I want to introduce to you my good friend, Tim Lennon. Hey, Tim, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. I'm happy to be here, Ashley.
So glad to have you here. And I'm trying to think, we met, what was that, probably 2016 at the first SNAP conference I went to. I think it was
Probably,
2016.
yeah.
Yeah.
And you
And
did a presentation for our group, yes.
yeah, so it was, yeah, it seems like I've known you for a lot longer than that, but really 2016 wasn't that far back. And for everybody who's listening, Tim is the president of SNAP, which stands for Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests. It's one of the oldest and most well-known survivor advocacy organizations that deals with clergy, sexual abuse, and sexual misconduct. And I believe SNAP celebrated, what, 33 years, 34 years?
31 years, something like that, yes.
Awesome.
Maybe
Yeah.
32.
So exciting. All the work that SNAP has done in the past and is doing now. And Tim, as the president of SNAP, I'm just going to go ahead and read your bio really quickly, and then I'd love for you to kind of do a personal introduction for yourself.
Sure.
So I'm just going to read this bio that you sent me here. Tim Lennon is the president of the board of directors of Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, otherwise known as SNAP. He is a survivor of rape and sexual abuse when he was 12. Memories of that abuse remain buried for decades. In 2010, Tim became a volunteer local SNAP leader in San Francisco Bay Area. He retired at that time and did full-time volunteer peer support correspondence for SNAP. He joined the SNAP board in 2011 and became president in 2018. Tim has two daughters that are twins, that are 21. He lives in Tucson and enjoys yoga, cooking, reading, dancing, theater, and movies. And you do enjoy dancing. You're actually quite a good dancer, because at that last leadership meeting at SNAP, a bunch of us went dancing, and I was like, wow, he's got some good moves. I was impressed.
I love dancing, yeah.
Me too. I enjoy it. I'm not so good at it as you are, but that was a lot of fun. But yeah, please, this is just, a bio about you. I'd love for you to kind of introduce yourself to our listeners, who you are, kind of your background, and then the work that you are doing now.
Sure. I grew up in a large Catholic family in Iowa, and everyone in my neighborhood was Catholic. Everyone had 6, 8, 10 kids. I came from a family of 12. The parish priest sexually abused me and raped me. Um, and abused, I found out later when I went public that 15 of my classmates were
Oh
similarly
gosh.
sexually abused. But it points to that memories of abuse are buried, or each person that's been abused keeps thinking, it's just me, I'm alone. And only later, when someone steps forward, that they see, yeah, that I'm not alone. And we
Mm.
saw that with the gymnasts. One courageous gymnast stepped forward, and 500 other victims said, me too.
Yeah.
Same thing with Bill Cosby. So, um, coming out, speaking up is important. And my advocacy and work with SNAP is part of the idea, is a fight back that what happened to me should never happen to another child.
Right, right. Yeah, I honestly think that the greatest blow we can, give to that darkness of abuse is fighting back, is speaking out and creating healing resources for others to be able to break free and experience a healing experience as well. Yeah, thank you so much for your work.
I think there's another element to that, and I'm from what I've seen, what I've heard, what I read is like most victims, even adult victims, their first reaction is to freeze.
Yeah.
So stepping out of that and stepping forward is important for your own health, and in
Mm.
the end, you may be helping someone else.
Absolutely, 100%. And we've talked about that a little bit on our show, how there's the responses that you have when you experience trauma. There's fight, flight, and what is
Mhm.
less commonly known but has gotten a bit of publicity recently is freeze. And, that can be just really where you feel overwhelmed by the abusive experience and unable to move forward. And so you're right, speaking up and talking about what you've experienced, even if it's just to one safe person, it can make all the difference in the world.
Exactly.
And thank you for leading the way there. um, so our focus tonight is going to be the history of the survivor movement. And when we think about whether it's the Catholic Church or, a lot of the other church denominations that we have found in recent years having very similar problems of just these masses and masses of child sexual abuse, adult sexual abuse, and other forms of abuse like spiritual abuse and such. Um, and so we've just really been hearing about this type of thing in the media fairly recently. Of course, SNAP has been around for 30 years, but you and I both know that abuse has been around certainly before that. I believe that there's documents even in the 11th century about priests abusing children. And so this has been going on for ages. So the Me Too movement has kind of popped up recently in 2017 and kind of brought some popularity to this conversation, but it's been going on for a lot longer. And I would love to hear from you, kind of the history of the survivor movement as you see it, at least the modern day movement.
Right. Well, I think our movement is not just modern, it's um, a vanguard, if you will.
Mm,
We can see that the survivor movement came out of two different currents. One was the first was the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, and that was only in 1875 or so.
mm,
And up until around 1900 were their beginnings of making any kind of laws or whatever. And usually they were centered around orphanages and local child protection agencies, not in the sense of national laws or national
mm,
culture, but there was a first start of that. And it was after the Second World War that we saw significant legislative change in the 50s and 60s around child abuse and then child sex abuse. And
mm,
through that, there were a number of different kinds of associations and coalitions around that. And going up until 2010, 2015, the formation of childhelp.org and Child USA, two
mm,
huge, wonderful organizations that deal with sexual abuse. So, one current of the sexual abuse movement is through the Society for the Protection of Children going back to 1875. And that current continues in hundreds of different kinds of organizations. The second current of our survivors movement is the women's movement of the
mm,
1970s. Through
mm,
conscious raising programs of women getting together to speak their truth of misogyny, oppression, exploitation, diminishment, the issues of incest, the issues of sexual abuse became more and more a topic of discussion, awareness, that gave rise to rape crisis centers
Mm,
and various statewide coalitions of sex abuse organizations.
right.
So this was a powerful beginning of our movement.
Mm,
The first survivor organization that is primarily a survivor run or survivor focused was the Survivors of Incest Anonymous. And that was about
mm.
1985, I believe.
Wow. Wow.
And then 1988, SNAP was formed. And then in the mid 90s, we had two organizations that are two of the largest today,
Mm,
Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network, and I think about 95. And the
mhm,
other one is Darkness to Light, which is a marvelous organization that has educational programs for organizations, schools, and whatever. And RAIN
mm,
has a hotline. Child Help.org has a hotline. So these were all part of a development of two different currents.
mm.
And in a recent period, we have seen the necessity and the importance of organizations working together.
Yeah.
Um, I hope I'm not just a we have been focused on in starting out in the Catholic community, but soon expanded to all religious communities. But we also saw that there's been dramatic involvement from Boy Scouts, a gymnast, which I
Yeah.
just mentioned, those that are abused in the military, and more recently, organization dealing with those that have been abused by Epstein. So
Mm,
we've seen a number of different kinds of survivor organizations rising up, kind of organically, if you will. And we've seen that there's a significant importance that we as a movement can exercise more power as the more connections and communication we develop. So the Me Too movement and the wonderful work of Tarana Burke in developing that meme of
mhm,
Me Too, that has helped galvanize the language. In other words,
mm.
when you talk about sexual abuse, it's not just a practice, but it's also a language we use, the culture we're in,
Yes.
society, the laws, our connections, both family and the home, in the workplace, in athletic teams, all these different spheres. So Me Too brought it home that it's not just me,
Right.
that I'm one of many others that have been abused.
Mm,
So we are in the process of, I believe, building this and creating the consciousness of a survivors movement. I call it survivors movement for respect and dignity, because
mm.
that's what we want, is
Yeah.
respect and dignity. Um, that will be akin to the great social movements previous to us, whether it's the
Mm,
women's movement or the civil rights movement or the environmental movement, that
right.
we are here. No longer are we going to be standing back
Yeah.
and waiting for people to tell us. We're going to be telling us. No more standing at the back of the bus.
Yeah.
We're going to stand up and declare we're survivors. We want a safe community.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that was such a great capsule of history, and there's so many things that I learned from there. There were pieces that you'd said that I was familiar with, but really putting it on that timeline was super helpful for me, and I think also for our listeners. And a couple things that really stood out to me um, is just on one hand, it started in the 1800s, kind of this movement, but in the grand scheme of things, that's really not that long ago.
Right,
Um,
exactly.
and so, what we're seeing is something that has been as old as time, affecting people, harming people, and then only in recent times has there ever been any, real solidified movement to create change. And I loved how you brought up the women's movement as well, because the YWCA, they were really strong in the women's movement, and particularly addressing domestic violence. And that's where I got my training from, the sexual assault response program sponsored by the YWCA. And so I do think it's interesting how when we bring light to so many other movements, whether it's the women's movement, the civil rights movement, the LGBT movement, the environmental movement, what we find when we dig into all these movements is that there is abuse there, and that it's inside either the movements themselves or the people, being, affected. And those ideas are coming to the surface and being lit up. And now we're able to, like you said, galvanize with this term Me Too and kind of move forward in a strong way and demand what we deserve as survivors, which is dignity and respect, just as you said. So thank you for sharing that history. And I'm really curious, when you look at this movement, to me it seems like it's picked up a lot of speed in recent years. Would you agree with that?
Yes, definitely. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I imagine the challenges that existed when the movement was just starting to get going back in the 1800s, that we're facing different challenges as a movement today. And so in this question I'm formulating, it's less, what do just individual survivors face, but as a movement as a whole, what challenges do you see the survivor movement coming up against in these new times?
Well, I think the biggest thing is connection and communication. Obviously, social media and activist organizations like SNAP or Child USA or yourself, bringing the issue before the community, saying that we need to make our communities safe. That means the awareness and involvement of everybody. And, sometimes we pose the question of our organization is opposed to actions within the church. And I say, no, our actions are based on how do we make the community safer?
Right.
How do we hold those that are criminals accountable?
Yeah.
So the challenge is showing connections with all of us so that we can increase our collective power to affect change,
Right.
to raise awareness. And so by making connections, we individual help each other. If the work I do in SNAP, I believe helps build the movement as a whole. And when the movement as a whole succeeds or makes a win in laws or culture or language, that helps SNAP. So we
Right.
have the challenge of building those links and making those kinds of connections. And that is a process. And, we're not unified in the sense of same directions, missions, goals, but that's okay. I mean,
Right.
that's where
Right.
we're at.
And if I could just say something right there, because I love that has been a focus of your presidency in SNAP, is reaching out to other organizations and really trying to find the similarities, because there's so many organizations working to end abuse. They're maybe hitting at it from a different angle. They maybe have different expertise, or there's a different group of survivors that they're specifically serving. But you've kind of talked about this as sort of a constellation, and with the All Survivors Day movement, maybe we'll talk about that in a minute. But I really appreciate you focusing on making those connections. And I'm particularly honored with the Courage Conference and Courage 365 that we've been welcomed into kind of your network. I've been really honored to have the opportunity to be vice president in the board. And just, I really like how different organizations are now sharing their expertise with each other and working together. And so that's certainly a strength. And I appreciate the way you've really worked at making that move forward. Yeah.
Our challenges, help define ourselves as a movement. In other words, when we talk about statute of limitations, when we talk about people freezing, Child USA said that the average age of a victim of child sex abuse is 52 before they come forward.
Mm,
So every parent, everyone that's in the community can recognize that it's not just that person over there, it's us, it's our
right.
society, our community, and that they have an interest, we have an interest in advancing statute of limitations. So that can be a uniting fact, uniting broad selection of folks. And the
Mm-hmm.
other is holding people accountable. We find
Yeah.
out, Epstein was caught sexually abusing in Florida, and they let him off basically with a year probation or something like that.
Right.
So it's the community's responsibility to hold the politicians accountable. We need to hold the district attorneys and attorney generals accountable, that they need to be responsible to do their jobs. We
Yeah.
need laws that protect our community.
Mm,
We haven't had that. We've had opposition from insurance companies, of course, church, Boy Scouts have
mm,
fought the statute of limitations reforms for over a decade.
right.
Same thing with the Jehovah's and
Mhm.
other groups.
And for those who aren't familiar with the statute of limitations thing that's going on, um, can you talk to us a little bit about what is the statute of limitations, and then also why are some of these organizations opposing changing the statute of limitations?
Right. Well, in my case, I was raped when I was 12.
Mm,
Um, Memories of that rape didn't surface for 50 years.
right.
Um, 30 years after I was abused, I remembered some of it. I wrote to the church and said, I was abused. You should remove this priest. Um, they wrote back a very dismissive letter, um,
I've gotten those. Ah,
but
very frustrating. Mm,
and in the letter that I wrote to them, I said there's a lot I can't remember. Well, after 50 years, I did remember, and
mm,
I'm not a usual, and that's why I mentioned the Child USA in 52 years. But most laws, up until the last 3 or 4 years, most states said you had to report by the age of 25 or
yeah.
26. 7 or 8 years after age of majority, when you become an adult.
Right.
But for me, where the abuse was so horrific, um, I couldn't bring those memories forward.
Yeah.
Uh, Dave Clossie, one of our founders of SNAP, said that memories of our abuse come forward when we have the strength to face them.
Mm,
And for most people, that means adult life. And the laws that limit reporting, um, eliminating any path to justice.
right. Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So basically, the statute of limitations is preventing people from pursuing the justice system because they didn't either remember on time or, have the resources to pursue it. And what SNAP wants to do is to be able to remove those statute of limitations. So at any point, they can bring their case forward and get justice and protection for themselves and others. Is that correct?
Yeah, and we welcome all those that might be interested in this work. I've done work with state legislator, the minority leader of uh, Senate Minority Leader of
Mm-hmm.
Iowa on statute of limitations reform. I've been up to South Dakota and worked with the Indians in South Dakota around statute of limitations reform.
Yep.
And I even did a little bit of work here in Arizona around statute of limitation reform.
Yeah, thank
So
you. Wow.
I'm personally active, but SNAP is an organization, and our 160 volunteer leaders of SNAP um, are also active in a number of different states and have been very active in this issue.
Mm, yeah, yeah, that's such important work. And so you were saying that, that's a challenge for survivors is the statute of limitations are there. And so SNAP is working to make it more accessible for victims and survivors to get
Yeah.
justice. And why would you say, for those who aren't familiar, why would you say that organizations like the Catholic Church and the Boy Scouts and, Jehovah's Witnesses and other groups, why are they pushing so hard to not open up the statute of limitations? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's a general thing, and that is that, for instance, in the Catholic Church, is they want to keep things hidden,
Right,
partly to escape any kind of accountability from criminal cases, but also liability in civil cases. But another huge part of them wanting to cover up is they want to keep that quiet from their parishioners. They
right.
don't want them to know how widespread sexual abuse is. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the, excuse me, but lame excuses they use is, well, memories fade and witnesses aren't around.
Mm-hmm.
But my counter to that is, in any court case, you're in front of a judge, you're within a jury, and there's equal ability to bring forward facts and knowledge that you have, and
Right,
it's the jury to decide. So it's not automatic that you bring an accusation that you're automatically getting anywhere. And
right.
a reminder, in civil cases, maybe only 2% of all victims, maybe not even that, ever get any kind of civil judgment, money.
Right.
We hear about it in the newspapers, but you know,
Right.
um,
They only
that's
focus on the wins
misleading.
in the papers. Yeah.
And the other is, of course, that the insurance companies don't want to be responsible or accountable. They've uh, uh, covered, particularly what I know of Catholic churches, is and the church misled them, and they don't want to be responsible, so they fight
Right.
any kind of reform. But again, we have to get back to justice and accountability.
Yeah.
And I'll give you one example. Father O'Grady, um, Deliver Us from Evil, was that the name of there's a documentary. I'm sorry, I don't have
That
that.
sounds right. That sounds right to me. Yeah.
He abused kids as young as 2 years old, but he
Mm,
abused kids for like 60 years.
mm,
So when you have statute of limitations,
right.
you have the ability to remove predators from society.
Right.
And when you continue to cover up these priests abuse and abuse, the priest that abused me, he was caught 3 times in 3 different small towns in Iowa before he
Ugh,
came to my parish, where he abused me, raped and abused me,
wow.
and 15 of my classmates. The only reason my abuse stopped was because he got moved to another parish when he got
Mm,
caught.
mm,
So when you have accountability, when you have strong laws, you're
yes.
essentially protecting the community.
Yeah.
Uh, that is incredibly important. People think it's sort of like, well, that happened a long time ago. That's what they tell victims or survivors all
Yeah.
the time. What happened a long time ago, forget about it.
Yeah.
It only happened once, forget about it. Um, Father so and so was such a nice person. How could you say such?
Mm, mm,
But all of that is part of it. The other thing is justice and accountability to remove them so they don't harm another child.
right. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. It's kind of a twofold thing where not only does that individual survivor deserve the justice, but they could be stopping mass abuse, from happening if the justice system would take things seriously. And I think a lot of times when we get pushback from the church or from family or from, other people who are supporters of whether it's a pastor or, whatever type of leader, a lot of times they're just hyper focused on like the one victim. But what we see in research is that pedophiles don't just have one victim. Like, I want to say something like the statistics are like 100 and something per predator. And that depends on you know, which sex the child is. And so there's a lot.
One is too many.
Yeah, exactly. One is too many. And to know that it's astounding to me that people would have understanding of not only has this happened to one person, but if we don't stop this now, it could happen to so many others. Um, it's just mind boggling that insurance companies and churches and big institutions wouldn't want to protect people, but we see that all the time, every day. And so, yeah, that's definitely a challenge the survivor movement faces. And so, thank you for bringing that forward. And I'm wondering, you've been with SNAP for several years now, and you have talked to so many different survivors. And, I'm wondering what, from your own experience and from working with survivors through SNAP, what are maybe like the top three healing tools or, just a word of advice for survivors on that journey? What are some things that stick out to you? Um, because people listening to this show, some people have experienced the abuse a long time ago and have gotten therapy and have kind of worked through these things, but other people who are tuning in, maybe they've just discovered or just remembered or just experienced abuse. And so what kind of advice could you give somebody early on in that journey?
Um, I think listening. I think
Mm,
it's incredibly important to acknowledge the harm that is done,
yeah.
and that is being respectful. Um, and I think I can't tell you how many people I have talked to um, that call and pour their heart out.
Mm,
And when you are respectful, that is, I believe, can be incredibly healing for them
yeah.
that they're believed. And the hashtag believe women,
Hmm.
hashtag believe children, that is so incredibly important
Mm,
that they are acknowledged, that they're respected.
yeah.
So to me, that's always the first thing. It's not like what my views are or what my advice is. I try to
Hmm.
step away from advice.
Right.
um, I always like on starting point one is to listen, to hear
Yes.
them, to know that they know that you're respecting their story and
Mm,
understanding it. The
yeah.
second, I think the element that to me is I always see important is, people say, well, should I contact the church? Should I contact the police or whatever? And my suggestion has always been, in answer to that, is talk to a close friend, talk to your close family member. The
Mm,
important thing is to tell your story.
mm,
Telling your story does tremendous things. One, it's stepping out. It's helping you um, stepping away from yourself. That it's not my
mm,
fault. This is my story. This is what happened to me. It's not me. It becomes a point where you can get support.
mhm,
It's an opportunity to see that there was a crime in the criminal.
mhm,
Um, so just telling somebody, and I like to use the analogy of a pebble in a pond.
mm,
A pebble thrown into a pond starts small, but you expand that circle.
yeah.
If you develop that community close to you and have that support of knowing that the good times and hard times ahead, that you have that support,
Right.
enables you to step out, maybe to tell others or to confront the predator or to tell the police or to tell the church. But um, it's important to make that step. It's very, very courageous. I'm going to bring tears.
Mm, mm,
But it's very important to tell your story. I believe.
absolutely.
Um,
Mm,
Final thing, the third thing that I think is incredibly important, and that is self care.
yeah.
In other words, we're doing this to take care of ourselves. We're not doing this to change the world or to change someone else or to fight someone else or fight an institution. We're doing this for our self healing.
Mm,
So we can do the challenges to the institution or to the person or to the
mm,
predator or to whatever. We can stand up on a soapbox and yell, but we always have to keep in mind that the most important thing is to take care of ourselves.
Hmm.
That no kind of advocacy or activism or anger needs, you can't be separated from how you're going to take care of yourself so that you can be on a path of healing. And,
Absolutely.
of course, lastly is um, engage engage support or seek out
Mm,
support, whether it's a support group like SNAP has support groups,
mm,
peer support groups, or there are other organizations, other support groups. Reach out to a hotline,
mm.
engage a therapist.
Yep.
So these are all different kinds of things. A professional therapist is an incredible help and support for any survivor.
Absolutely. Yes. Agree with that 100%. Therapy has definitely changed my life. All those are such valuable things, and the listening part is so important. And what I've seen in my work as an advocate is just the same as what you mentioned. Just listening to somebody share their story, um, that really can be a turning point for that person.
Yeah.
And I think it can determine how quickly or um, how their healing process goes if the first person they tell their story to, whatever that reaction is, and if the first person they tell their story to is shaming and blaming and questioning them, that can cause
Right.
somebody to shut down for years. But if you can just listen to somebody empathetically and, I hear you, I see you, I believe you, what do you need? Those kinds of things, that can make all the difference in the world and really bolster courage and um, just really help people along that healing path. And so thank you for mentioning all of those things, Tim. And I would love for you to just share a little bit about the support group model that SNAP has, because
Yeah.
we've talked about, how important therapy is. Um, Talk about the peer support group and why that's such a valuable tool as well, because I think that has something to do with this listening piece.
Yeah, I think the support group can be seen similar to like an AA group.
Mm,
In other words, when you walk into the room, you walk in as a survivor. Each person is um, a survivor or a supporter, but um, they don't come in as a therapist or an attorney or an expert or as a religious figure. We step in as individuals.
yeah.
SNAP has very clear guidelines. We read the guidelines every meeting, before every meeting.
Mm,
Basically, it's based on mutual respect. In essence, our meetings are divided into two parts. The first part, we share our stories and provide an opportunity for everybody to share their stories where there's no interruption, that it's
mm,
each individual's story. We don't make comments about it or obviously no criticism, but
right.
it's their opportunity to tell their story or what's happening with them that week. Um, and so this first part stays as long as everybody has an opportunity to
Mm,
speak that
mm,
wants to speak. No one is
yeah.
forced to speak. It's just an opportunity to speak. And
Yeah.
then the second half, we talk about maybe something we learned or something new, or there may be an event either locally or nationally that we chat about. Um, but it provides a great amount of healing. I've been going to SNAP support groups, well, from 95 to 98, and then from 2010 until now,
Mm,
on a monthly basis. And early on, and coming into my memories, for a while, I was going to a support group twice a month. Um, but I find them incredibly helpful. They don't
mm,
substitute for a therapist,
sure.
but they do provide a connection where the story of another um, is your story. And I don't
Right.
know how to put that. It's kind of hard to believe, but I can't tell you how many times that I just felt like, oh my God, you know, that's me. That's
Yeah.
me. And I'm sure the same thing that in AA, they have those same kind of
Mm,
revelations, if you will, that
right.
um, someone else's story is my
Mhm.
story, and that's what I think is the benefit
Right.
of support groups. And
Yeah.
we're not alone.
Yeah. And what I'm taking from everything that you said, from both like the idea of the survivor movement and how it's evolving and bringing other, communities in together, different organizations together, also talking about these support groups, it seems like the forward motion, whether that's in personal healing or whether that's in the movement as a whole, really is community, and that's kind of the thing that's gonna bring this forward when we center this survivor community and then realize that there's really no community in the world that doesn't experience abuse. And so kind of just broadening this till we can reach everybody, and when we can come together as a force of nature, this community, then we can create change. We can change the statute of limitations. We can help people get into peer support groups, into therapy, and change laws and all these things. And so that's just super valuable. And I want people to be able to learn how to get in touch with the SNAP support groups. But before we do that, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to be right back with the rest of this interview.
So there's choices that you have the opportunity to make. You can either stay with your abuser or you can leave. And make no mistake about it, it's going to be hard either way you go. But I can tell you one thing for sure. If you do decide to make that courageous decision to go, there's hope. So much hope.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Courage 365 show. I'm your host, Ashley Easter, and we are back with Tim Lennon. He's the president of SNAP, Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, and we have just been talking about the history of the survivor movement, how important community is for personal healing and also for really bringing this survivor movement forward. Tim, thank you so much for everything that you've shared so far, and I would love to really hear from you. You've gone through your own personal healing journey. You've talked to so many survivors. You've been involved in changing laws and legislations, or at least working towards those goals with the statute of limitations stuff. From all of those experiences, what would you say would be one of the best pieces of advice that you've received doing this work and being on your own healing journey?
I think that your last part is probably the most important, and that is um, when you go through therapy, when you go to a support group, when you tell family and friends, that's all courageous steps, but it's a journey. Um, and I think my biggest lesson that I learned is there's no like I'm healed at the end. This is sort
Mm,
of like I'm thriving, I'm on a path to healing.
yeah.
And that means I give myself space that sometimes things are good, sometimes things are bad, but I'm on a
Mm,
path of healing and directing that. In my personal case, I found incredible help with EMDR.
mm,
Um, and Wikipedia has a nice definition of it. So EMDR, if someone is interested in that. And basically what it is it says um, sexual abuse, especially if children, is buried in your emotional memory, in your
right.
amygdala or whatever it is. Uh, but that that emotion will always interfere or intervene in your life, in your
Mm,
social relationships, in your romantic relationships, in your work and your day-to-day life. And you it if you try to just bury it, it is going to continue to stay there because it's not going to be
right.
buried. It's part of who you are.
Yeah.
So yeah, EMDR and what it taught me is to bring those memories forward, make them part of who I am as a person.
Mm.
So for me, that meant that at 63, I
Mm.
called myself my true self.
Mm.
Words, I was no longer having the past control who I am. That
Right.
I'm now on a path of I'm controlling my future.
Mm.
I have some very horrific.
Mm.
I have very horrific memories,
Yeah.
but because they are part of who I am, I understand them as memories and get to make my own life. Uh,
Mm. Wow. Wow. That is so powerful. You're separating from the memories being something that consumed the whole of your experience to a place where you're now getting to call the shots and make the choices and take your power back. And that's a brave journey. And I'm so glad that have taken that journey. And that's, been my experience as well. And just so thankful for your um, leadership of yourself to do that, but then also you turning around and helping other survivors and really investing in organizations like SNAP to help other people get to that place where they're able to take their power back as well. That's yes, thank you so much for sharing that. And EMDR therapy, it's really awesome. We had somebody on the show a couple weeks ago, Mike Phillips, and he's an EMDR therapist, and he was telling us all about it. So if you all are interested, yes, definitely check out the Wikipedia page about EMDR therapy, but look back through some of our past episodes on the Courage 365 show, and you can kind of get an in-depth look at exactly how it works, because Tim is so right. That's a really powerful tool. Tim, I would love for you to just kind of tell people where they can find you and your work. I know that you have a blog, and I'd love you to share about that. But also, how can people get in touch with SNAP, and where can they learn more about the support groups and all those things? Like, share your work, share SNAP's work. How can people get involved?
right. Well, the first suggestion is to go to snapnetwork.org, snapnetwork.org. And there we have a website, and at the very top banner, it has a contact page. And on that contact page has my email and my phone number. Feel free to call me or to email me. I welcome all communication. But also, if you go to the front page and you go to locations, there you can go to a number of different categories. You can go to the United States and search 50 different states and find a local SNAP leader near you. Or also on that locations page are those abused by nuns, those abused as adults, ritual abuse, families of those abused, a number of other kinds of categories of people to contact. So we do have local leaders that are volunteers and, welcome your questions, your calls, and virtually all our support groups are online. So we have 30 or 40 support groups. We have a number of them by time zone, as well as like in Tucson, I have one that I reach most of Arizona. Um, and then we have support groups around ritual abuse, abused as adults, abused as nuns, um,
I love that there's
family.
so many categories. Like, you can go on this and you can find it by your state or by a certain type of abusive experience you've had. Like, there's so many support groups that, definitely, if that's something you're interested in, like, people should totally check that out. So yeah, thank you for sharing about that. And as
And
far as like the social media, like how can they be in touch with SNAP on a regular basis?
Well, just one other aspect of the online support groups is we don't check IDs at the door. In other words, you don't
Mm,
need to be a Catholic. You don't need to be of within religious institutions. So,
right.
as far as social media, I'm on Twitter. We do some work posting on Twitter, not very much as an organization. But we do have a Facebook page that is very, very active. We get as many visitors to our Facebook page as we do the website. Um, and there we have notifications of the different support groups. We have news, and we do a fair number of media statements concerning the issues of the day, whether within the Catholic community or within the larger um, issues around sexual abuse, a part of our
Mhm.
survivors movement, what is important and significant for us to make our community safer.
Absolutely.
And my blog is standupspeakup.org. I have quite a bit of documents on my my story of what letters I wrote to the church,
Mm,
their responses to me, some pictures, whatever. But I also have a tremendous amount of stuff about how to take action, a number of different resources for survivor support. Um, I have listings of organizations that provide support in the larger movement. I think I have a list of like 80 organizations. So there's a lot of resources for survivors. And again, you don't need to be a Catholic, you don't need to be religious. The resources are there. Um, for instance, I have a resource, How to Research Your Abuser. Uh,
that's a good one.
Defined for Catholics, but it could be used for anyone.
That's great. And say that web address one more time for us.
Thank you. Standupspeakup.org.
Excellent. Standupspeakup.org. Everybody, you're going to want to check that out. You're going to want to check out Snap and Tim's website. He's got so many resources. Snap does too. Thank you so much for being a part of this interview and sharing your wisdom as a survivor yourself and also as an advocate who is helping other people. It's really been great to learn from you about the history of the survivor movement. Just want to give you a big thank you for your time and all the wisdom that you shared today.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and again, I'm honored to be here and look forward to future work together.
Absolutely. Same here. Well, everybody, I want to also direct you to the social media of Courage 365. Please definitely go follow Snap and Tim's website and Tim on social media, but also go ahead and like us on Facebook and Twitter, the Courage 365 organization. And also, you've heard me call this out for the last couple weeks. We have, I think, 49 people who are following us on YouTube. We need 100 subscribers before we can get our custom URL. That's going to help us reach more people. So if you have not liked the Courage 365 show on YouTube, please go ahead and do that right now. Ask your friends to do that because we have like 52 more people that we need to get that custom URL. And of course, tune in every Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern to catch the Courage 365 show. Go to our website, courage365.org. And just for going to our website, you can get a free downloadable ebook called 5 Keys to Living a Life of Courage. This is for people who are in the beginning stages of their journey to healing. You can also go to the Need Help tab on our website, courage365.org, and we have a bunch of hotlines that are listed and different resources and organizations that can be helpful and supportive of your journey. And on our homepage, if you scroll down to the bottom, you can catch our back episodes of the Courage 365 show. And exciting news, we are going to be turning this into a podcast pretty soon, and we're going to be taking the live videos, reformatting them, putting them in podcast versions so you can listen to them when you're you're on the road or, when you're cooking or whatever in the house, if you can't sit down and just watch a video show. So we're really excited about that next step that's going to be coming soon. Want to thank you all for listening. Lovely to have you here on the Courage 365 show. Live with courage this week.